Welcome to Mishna study. Masechet Demai, Perek Gimel, Mishna Dalet. Over here in this Mishnah, we're going to speak about if a person wants to take his wheat and give it to an Am Haaretz or a Goy's mill, like grinding mill, right? So he goes, he takes his wheat and gives it to this non-Jew or the Am Haaretz, and he comes back to now get the flour in return, right? The Goy, Am Haaretz now ground it up. When he receives it back, could he assume that it's his own, that he gave him, right? Or do we assume that maybe it was swapped out, maybe he got someone else's, maybe he got the goy's himself? How exactly does this work? That's what we're going to speak about in Mishnah. We'll speak about if we're taking wheat to be, to grind wheat, or if a person wants to actually just put his fruits, like give his fruits to his neighbor who also maybe a goy, Am Haaretz also. How do we treat those fruits when he gets them back? המוליך חיטב לטחון כותי או לטחון עם הארץ כחזקתן למעשרות ולשביעית ולטחון הנוכרי דמאי מפקיד פירותיו אצל הכותי ואצל עם הארץ כחזקתן למעשרות ולשביעית אצל הנוכרי כפירותיו. רבי שמעון אומר דמאי. So if a person takes his chita and he takes it to a grinder, right, a mill, a person who's literally milling, like grinding up the wheat, or to an Am Haaretz, so kuti and Am Haaretz, we say that it have the same chazaka, kehazkatan la ma'asrot v'la right? So Rambam over here explains it's like the chazaka as they were of the ma'asrot and the shvi'it. That we don't worry that he swapped them. We trust him. We trust him that he gave us in return what we gave him, right? So it's a very nice way of reading it. It's like the chazaka of the ma'asrot and the shvi'it as he was when he gave it to them, right? I just think it's really nice how Rambam explains over here. Actually, is kilomar. Every time Rambam says kilomar, right over here it says ritzonolomar, that he's always bothered. And this is something Rabbi Aluf taught, me. He's always bothered by something over literal, where you can misunderstand something if you take it in the most literal sense, right? So if you were reading this in the most literal sense, you're reading, a person took his wheat over to a mill to be, to grind up, and he receives it back, or he takes it to a kuti or an Am Haaretz, it's kehazkatan. Hazkatan, you could have misunderstood it and said, oh, it's like the hazaka of the kuti and the Am Haaretz. That's not what it is, right? We're not saying that. We're not saying that. That would be Demai. That's what the next part of the Mishnah says. When you take it to Honochri, it's Demai. So rather Rambam explains it, right? Rightfully so. It's just amazing his sensitivity to the language, right? Being sometimes too literal. He's very sensitive. He says, no, when you receive it back, it's like the hazaka as when you gave it to them. The same way it was me'usar, if you gave it to them me'usar, and if you gave them shvi'it, we take it back as we receive it back as we gave it to them. But if you give it to a tahon hanochri, if you give it to a non-Jew miller, someone who's grinding, that's demai, right? Because we assume that the non-Jew swapped it out with someone else's wheat that he got, right? Everyone gave him wheat. Everyone gave him wheat, so he gave everyone back flour, right? You gave me a pound of wheat, I'm going to give everyone back a pound of flour, not necessarily from your own wheat. He's insensitive to that. Rambam also points out that every time that we have a difference between a goy and a kuti, remember we mentioned this in Masechet Berachot, right? After we found out that the kutim were worshiping Avodah Zarah, they're equal to goyim in all senses, right? So when we have any difference between them, it must be beforehand, before the takana and the halacha. If we gave it to a kuti, we would have the same din as a nochri, and it would also be demai. A person takes his fruits to a kuti or to an Am Haaretz. Same idea. If you take it to you go ahead and you leave your fruits by your neighbor who's a kuti, right, or an Am Haaretz, it's the same way you brought it there. If they were me'usar, you receive, when you get them back, you assume they were me'usar. If you gave them shvi'it, you assume they were shvi'it. If you gave them when they weren't me'usar, then when you get them back, you receive them as if they weren't me'usar. But if you give them to a goy, it's a nochri, keferotav. It's as if it's his own fruit. Now, what's the deen of his own fruit? Rambam over here says in his perush, it's like the fruit of a goy, and a goy is not obligated in separating terumot and ma'asrot. So when you receive it back, you're not hayav anything. It's an amazing pirush, right? He's saying, we gave it to the goy, we assume that the goy swapped it. So imagine you gave him something that you didn't separate Terumot and Ma'asrot yet, and now you receive it back. We assume that you got the goy's fruit and you don't have to separate Terumot and Ma'asrot. You didn't get back your own. It's an amazing pirush. I just point out over here, and now let's just finish. Rabbi Shimon made Demai. Rabbi Shimon argues, says, no, it's Demai, right? Similar to the first half of the Mishnah, where he said if you give it to the miller, right, who's a goy, he gives it, you receive it back, it's Demai. So to over here, when you get back the fruits, it's also Demai. Halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon. Rather, if you give it to the goy, it's like a pirotav, right? We assume that it's his own fruit that he gave you. His own fruit is not hayav in Terumot and Ma'asrot, and seemingly you don't have to do anything to it. Right? Even if you didn't separate Terumot and Ma'asrot yourself before you gave him the fruits. So Rambam, though, I'm saying though, because it seems like over here you don't have to do anything, but in the halacha, when he brings down halacha, he says we need to be mahmir, right? And we say this is only derech kula. This is all derech hachumra, and he actually mentions, if I read over here, he's posek that we're hoshesh the humra, right? If you gave the goy fruits, right? If they were already me'usar, then we assume when you got it back, you got the goy's fruits, okay, you don't have to do anything. But if you gave it to him and they weren't me'usar, you didn't separate Terumot and Ma'asrot, then you get back fruits from him. So we worry that maybe you got back your own. So when you receive it back from the goy, you still need to separate Terumot and Ma'asrot. And as we said, halacha is like Chachamim, not like Rabbi Shimon.